Motion is passed to withdraw Zionsville Presbyterian Church petition. We also have a motion to continue 2024-04-UV. They've asked for a continuance, and they will be on the docket for our next meeting in May. Is there a motion to grant a continuance for this petition?
I move to continue docket 2024-04-UV to the May 1st, 2024 meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that will be continued until our next meeting in May. Okay, new business. Docket number, let me just ask. Drew, if we have anybody online.
This is not Drew, it's John. John's here today. Yes.
Sorry, John. Okay, sorry. Okay. But if there's anybody there, and particularly if there's anyone who would like to speak, you will give us a signal, I hope. Thank you. Okay. Our procedure here is that we will have, for each of these petitions, we will have a staff report, followed by a 15-minute report by, or comments from the petitioner. And then there will be time for anyone who would like to speak either in opposition or in favor of the petition, and they will also be given 15 minutes with then subsequently 5 minutes rebuttal for the petitioner and also the same for any remonstrators. So with that in mind, we'll start with docket number 2024-06-DSV. The Zahn Real Estate Group, is that petitioner represented here this evening? Great, thank you. We'll start with the staff report. Mr. Smith?
Just noticing I don't have a mic, so I hope you can hear me. Sorry that it disappeared. It's okay.
You can record it.
Either way. All right, so yes, this is, as you noted, petition. It's a development standards variance. What you're seeing in the PowerPoint is what is currently there. This is a pre-existing building that was originally approved when it was in the county. I believe the original building permit was in 2000. What you're going to see in this next slide is, if approved, if the development plan is approved, this is what it will turn out to be. The petitioner is here tonight, but summarizing without getting into the weeds, this will be their new headquarters. And so if you look at the site plan, we've identified 3 issues that will need variances. The first one, you're not going to see circle. It's just, well, I guess I can go in order of your staff report. The first one will be on the south property line, which, if you see my mouse, is the red circle on the left. Part of this encroachment is already pre-existing. I suspect that it was approved when it was in the county, but we could not find the permits for that. Either way, part of the encroachment is already pre-existing. They are proposing to add an addition to that. It's not going to encroach any closer into the setback. However, because we couldn't find where the previous encroachment was approved by the county, we wanted to go ahead and get this addressed while we were doing this. So that's request number 1. Request number 2 is the red circle at the bottom of your screen. The county, I don't know if you can see in this slide, but this is the site plan that was approved at the county. And you'll notice down here where my mouse is at, that it's just a driveway. There's no shown parking spaces. Driveways are okay, parking spaces are not. They are considered encroachments. And so because these 5 spaces are there, and they were not approved on the site plan by the county, we want to go ahead and get a variance for those. So the request for the south property line, which is the first red circle, is to reduce the setback from 20 down to 9 feet. The bottom 5 parking spaces is to reduce the setback from 20 feet down to 0 because they're right on the property line. And then the third and final request will be for the overall number of on-site parking spaces for the overall project. Using the formula that we had originally, using the numbers for the on the Boone County property record card, we got to 57 parking spaces. I got with the petitioner and we got the proper allocation of office space versus storage space. So the required number is 44 parking spaces. Currently, there's 37 pre-existing, and if you approve the encroachment on the south property line, they will be able to add this addition, and this addition will add an additional 2 spaces. So if that addition is approved, the 2 spaces coupled with the pre-existing 37 brings their total space count to 39, and they are required to have 44. So that's the third needed variance. So from a staff positioning, a staff opinion, we'll start with variance number 1, which is in your packet, which is the south property line encroachment. Questions 1 and 2, will this negatively impact the welfare, the moral, safety, health of the public? We don't believe it will. It's a pre-existing encroachment. Will this negatively impact the use or the value of the adjoining sites? Again, we don't agree that it will. And we do believe this meets the hardship requirement, which is question number 3, because of its pre-existing conditions. So for this one, staff is in support of. The one on the south, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to see my screen around here. The one on the, you're fine. The one on the south property line, again, is a very similar situation. Pre-existing parking spaces, not really sure when they were added, but they're pre-existing. We don't think that it's going to negatively impact the use or the value of the adjoining properties. It's not going to negatively impact the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the community. So questions 1 and 2 we're fine with. Hardship, because it's pre-existing, that's a condition unique to this site. We feel like it meets the hardship standard as well. Variance number 3, which is for the overall number of parking spaces. We view this a little differently, and in the narrative, and I'm sure the petitioner can speak to this, in the narrative they are proposing 42 mixture of office or workstations, so up to 42 of those workstations. Having currently 37, possibly 39 spaces, could pose some problems if everyone is required to show up at the office, right? Currently, some of their employees work remote, or quite a few of their employees work remote off-site. However, staff has no guarantees that that policy would change, and we have to account for that. If 42 people show up with their vehicles and need to park at their home office, and there's only 39 spaces, you're going to have some people that could possibly spill over into the adjoining parcels or possibly park on the side of the road, which could be potentially dangerous or could impact the use or the value of the adjoining sites. Additionally, we don't think this meets the standard of hardship. We feel like the existing parking lot was pre-existing, right? You had to have known the number of sites there. Our parking requirements haven't changed. Having known the parking lot in its current condition, knowing that our parking requirements are what they are, they went ahead and selected this site anyway, which is creating the problem. We feel like hardships can't be self-created. We, because of that, do not support variance number 3, which is the reduction from 44 to 39 parking spaces. With that, I will turn it over to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions for staff about this petition?
Is the previous tenant, or I don't know if there's a tenant there now or not, but let's just say the previous tenant, were they in compliance with number of parking spaces based on what they used the building for?
Without knowing how many, their percentage of office and warehouse, kind of like what we do with the proposed project, it's hard to really calculate that. I can tell you It was originally intended as a warehouse back when it was constructed, and it was required to meet the county's threshold for warehousing when it was constructed, which it obviously did. It's changed over the years, and then now with this new proposal, it's going to be, I forget the exact percentages, but it's going to be office spacing with a small section, a small allotment of warehousing. And what we did originally was we took it all and we used the formula for office space over the entire building, which is how in our, what we call our pre-meetings, we got to 57 parking spaces. Later on, I partnered with the petitioner and we got the proper, correct allocation of office space to warehousing, which got us down to 44, which is what they're going to be required to do. I can't really speak to what's currently there because I don't know their percentages of office space to warehouse. And that's really needed in order to make the determination in your formula, your math formula.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mundy, we presume that the parking to office space or warehouse ratio complied with the county ordinance when the site was reviewed and approved by the county, but we don't know, without doing really extensive research on our behalf or the applicant's behalf to understand what those standards were back then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there further questions for Mr. Smith? I have a question, and this may be for the petitioner rather than for you. There is green space around this building. Is it possible that other parking spaces could be configured using some of the existing land that's around the building?
So I'll preference this by saying I'm not an engineer, so I haven't, got that behind me. I will say the green space that you're seeing is, I guess the easy way to answer this question without jumping off into the weeds, the petitioner is taking advantage of enhanced landscaping requirements. It's a section of our code that rewards developers for providing enhanced landscaping, and in exchange for the enhanced landscaping, we're reducing the front yard setback from 40 foot down to 20. So the green space that you're seeing is actually going to be utilized to take advantage of that component. If we did not take advantage of that section of the code that reduced that down to 20 feet, we would have an additional couple of needed requests because let me pull up the site plan. You'll see here at the top, which I didn't circle because we're not discussing, but the parking lot and portions of the existing building encroach into that 40-foot setback. But because we're reducing that using the enhanced landscaping, it's not an issue. And so I'm hesitant to say yes because we need probably about as much or all of that green space to account for the landscaping. But,
There's also a drainage swale along the road.
Yeah.
that
yeah.
Thank you.
poses problems.
Further questions for Mr. Smith? The petitioner, is it Mr. Curran? Please, would you come up and address the group? And if you would give your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Sean Curran with Curran Architecture. Address is 5745 Lawton Loop East Drive, Indianapolis. And a couple of, I guess I can answer a question as well as kind of provide some additional clarity to Mr. Smith's presentation. Appreciate all the work that he's done to help us kind of get to tonight. And a lot of conversations and emails back and forth. The current or former use of the building, our client is currently occupying the building. They purchased the building 3 or 4 years ago and have been occupying the building until now. And they continue to occupy the building. So the building is currently being used as office space with a portion of the building as warehouse space in the back. Prior to them occupying it, I know that the majority of it was office space because part of it they're not in was being occupied by a software engineering company, I believe, on the south end of the building. So they're currently occupying the building. It is currently their headquarters. They moved their headquarters from Ohio to Zionsville. So they're occupying the building currently. And it hasn't been an issue from a parking standpoint. They haven't had an issue, to the best of my knowledge, with any parking. Regarding the question of parking quantity, meeting the requirements, as you probably all know, and the audience knows, the changes in the way people work that have occurred since March of 2020 have dramatically affected the population in office spaces. Our client AES Restaurant Group, who's the occupant of the building, is no different from that. They also, they have people that work from home. They have people that work hybrid, where they work in the office, out of the office. This being their office, their kind of home office, as well, is where their kind of regional manager people occupy. And AES Restaurant Group owns 170 plus Arby's restaurants around the country. Those regional managers spend the majority of their time out in the field visiting those restaurants. So the frequency of them being in the office, and all of them being in the office at one time, is very minimal. What they currently do, if they were to have a all-staff meeting where they were even bringing in people from outside of, people that are at their restaurants, a lot of times they will do that at a hotel, because in those cases they're bringing in several hundred people. They do have a training room within the design of the space. That would be more for smaller group meetings. Those people coming in typically are not driving because they're flying in. Staff member that works in the office is going to typically pick them up, a group of them, when they arrive at the airport, drive them in for the meeting for the day, and then drive them back to the airport. They're not renting 8 or 9 or 10 cars and driving them up and adding additional headcount to. They might be adding additional headcount, they're not adding additional parking count, I guess is what I would say. In asking our client their typical headcount, they said their typical headcount on any given day is 25 to 30 people in the office. So yes, they have 42, 43 offices and workstations. The odds of them even being 90% occupied is pretty slim on any given day, obviously. In terms of percentage of office versus warehouse, currently there is almost 3,900 square feet of warehouse space within the overall building. They're reducing that down to roughly 1,900 square feet by creating some additional. Part of that is that training room that they're building out. Part of that is adding additional restrooms, because the restrooms were small, didn't meet ADA compliance, so providing additional restrooms for their staff. And then the rest of it is warehouse space. The addition that's on the south end of the building is removing the truck dock that's there now, and creating an addition that is providing enclosed parking spaces for 2 vehicles for their executive staff. So that's the 2 spaces that are being added. Any additional questions that you may have, I can answer. I think I kind of answered a couple of the questions that were asked, but if there's any additional ones, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Curran. Are there any questions for petitioner?
If the BZA were inclined to ask this, would your client be willing to commit to not having more than 25 to 30 people, staff people on site at any one time?
I don't know that I could commit to that, because that's less than the parking requirement even, than the parking spaces that are there. And if they did have a meeting where there were 35 or 40 people there, they still meet the parking requirement, or even if all the people drove their own cars there. I couldn't comment to that.
Okay.
I guess one question would be, and I don't know how, what the relationship your client has with its neighboring businesses, but is it, have they ever spoken with any of the neighboring businesses about, in the odd event that they would need additional parking, that they could use some of the parking spaces for the neighboring businesses?
I don't think that that's come up, just because I don't think that they've ever had that as an issue, but I could definitely inquire with them to see if that would be something that would be possible.
Is there a possibility of creating some parking spaces along the drive, which will go back to the enclosed parking?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a drive lane. I think you could probably fit, if you took it all the way out to where the existing green space stops, where you curve into that parking lot, you could easily fit 4 or 5 cars in there parallel parked. So I think in the case that there was a situation where you had that overflow situation where you were at that parking capacity, you could say, well, we can park cars parallel along there. And they don't, this isn't their office space. They don't have they don't have visitors. They don't have vendors that come. They don't have, people don't show up there to apply for a job, or, so they don't ever have people coming from outside. It's just their staff. So the odds of there being people just randomly showing up that can't find a parking space are going to be pretty slim.
Can the current parking along Mayflower Drive, it looks like it's at an angle and then a dead spot there, can that be redesigned in some fashion to add a few spots?
There may be able to be some restriping, but I mean, you're not going to add 5 spots on
No,
there. I can guarantee you
I'm
that.
just curious if that can be worked in there and all
Yeah.
or not.
I mean, you could conceivably add a spot and call it, compact car parking or motorcycle parking, or, if those are things that help appease the condition, I'm sure that striping is something that can be done.
Any further questions for Mr. Curran? Do we have anyone here that would like to speak either in support or in opposition to this project? Anyone online? No? Okay. Board discussion?
Well, I think this is the new reality of our work world, with hybrid working and remote working. They do have the risk of having more cars there than parking spaces, I suppose, at times, but, office work has changed dramatically in the last 4 years.
I think adding the extra square footage doesn't even add the requirement for an extra car. It's just the way it's currently built, it's underparked based on the way we do the calculation. I could argue that, it is sort of a hardship given that there's an existing building on a very uniquely shaped site. And parking doesn't work well on uniquely shaped sites, period. And you can see that by the way it's laid out. I mean, you've got a weird space on the north that I don't know how you get in and out of there very easily. And then those angled spots, which are kind of weird. I mean, I think the shape of the site, it was kind of parked to its capacity when the building was built. And the shape of the site is the hardship.
I was looking at the page 45, the last page of the thing, which is E101, looking at the floor plan. And that's the new reality. Some places are permanent offices, some are temporary workspaces, and we don't break that down, right? We just call them workspaces. So of the offices and workspaces, could you tell us how many is considered permanent workspaces and how many are floating workspaces or will be shared and temporary?
I don't know the exact percentages. I mean, the private offices are private offices, so those are people that would be occupying those spaces.
Mostly, yeah.
They're not sharing that with another person.
Right.
The workstations, I believe, for the most part, are workstations for the people that sit there. They're not hoteling stations where 3 or 4 people are using that space depending on whether they're in the office that day. So again, 25 to 30 people in the office at any given time, they're not occupying all of those seats. nor are, if you're in the office on Monday and I'm in the office on Wednesday, we're not both sitting in the same seat.
Okay, they're not hoteling there.
Right. I have my desk with my files and my things, and if I'm not there that day, that desk is sitting empty.
I mean, I know there is the concern that if everyone comes, where do they park? And they could park in other people's lots, but looking at the aerial and the surrounding, I mean, you're either gonna have an agreement or you're gonna get towed by somebody, right? There's not public parking they're gonna take up. So that's less of a concern for me, that they're not gonna take up all of it on street, retail businesses parking. Your neighbor's just gonna tow your employees if they do that, so you don't want that to happen.
And based on kind of what's down Mayflower Park Drive, if anybody parks on Mayflower Park Drive, they're probably going to get their car totaled by a semi, so.
Yeah, they're not taking downtown business parking or something if they do park in the wrong spot.
But it seems to me of the three variances, the first two are pretty much, I don't
Yeah.
have questions. The big question is whether, in fact, they will have 25 to 30 people there at any given day, and parking will not be an issue. Whether there's ever a day when they need more, 43 or 44 spots, and how frequently that might happen, if it happens at all. So,
Yeah, I don't want to see cram parking spots in there that are so tight that you're going to encourage accidents as well. Not all vehicles are compact. I drive an F-250 and it's fun to get in certain parking spots. So, I mean, yes, it's an odd laid out parking lot, but it's probably laid out that way so people can get in and out of those spots without 3-point turns and so forth.
It's gonna be tricky as well, just the parallel parking is gonna be hard to deal with as it is.
so are we anywhere close to a decision of any
I mean,
type?
I'll make motions anytime you want. But if there needs to be more discussion, then that's fine too. I don't want to cut anybody
Ready when
short.
you are.
Huh?
Whenever, yeah.
You're good?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I move that docket number 2024-06-DSV Development Standards Variance to reduce the required 20-foot side yard setback along the south property line to 9 feet for the property at 7031 Mayflower Park Drive be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations, submitted finding of fact, and substantial compliance with the site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Hinshaw. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. That's approved.
I move that docket number 2024-06-DSV Development Standards Variance to reduce the required 20-foot side yard setback along the east property line to 0 for the property at 7031 Mayflower Park Drive be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report and staff recommendations, submitted finding of fact, and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that is approved.
I move that docket number 2024-06-DSV Development Standards Variance to reduce the required number of on-site parking spaces to 39 for the property at 7031 Mayflower Park Drive be approved as presented and described based on the findings in the staff report, the fact that I believe that the site shape creates the hardship, satisfying the third requirement in the findings of fact, and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Hinshaw. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it's approved. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you all.
Curran.
Jonathan, you good? Move on?
Yeah, there's going to be 3 forms for y'all to sign,
Okay.
but we can sign and talk at the same time.
Thank you,
Sounds
Mr.
good.
Dale. Okay. The next item on our agenda is docket number 2024-07-DSV. D. Decker, Development Standards Variance for an additional accessory building resulting in use square footage exceeding 50% of the primary use in the urban single-family residential zoning district. Is Mr. Decker or a representative here? Great. All right, thank you. We'll start with the staff report, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Smith?
I got in my notes here at the very top, you'll notice they have a list of their neighbors supporting the request, so I'll put that in your packet. I always try to point those out when I get them. As you mentioned, this is a development standards variance. Section 194095 essentially states that you can't have more than 50% of the primary residence in accessory square footage. So to break this, to break the numbers down, which is on page 2 of your staff report, the petitioner has a house that is 2,172 square feet with the existing accessory uses of a garage, 2 porches, a shed, and then the new proposed detached garage. The total accessory square footage will be 1,606 square feet, which obviously will exceed the 50% threshold. So he is needing a variance to address that issue. Here is the math on this slide, and you'll see elevations of kind of what the proposed structure is going to look like. I'll go back to my previous slide so you can see the site plan. Here's their driveway, and according to the site plan, it'll be back in this area. And here's again, the numbers. Total accessory square footage will be 1,606. They're only allowed to have 50% of the primary. So as proposed, they are, let me get the math real quick. 172. At 2172, they would have 1,086 in accessory square footage, and they're at 1,606. So happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there questions for staff about this petition?
Are they compliant right now?
Just sitting here doing that math.
Yeah, it's got to be pretty close, and they may be.
Let's see. 600, 100 plus 192. They're at 1030, and they're allowed 1086. So yes, they are 56 square feet under what is allowed. So yes, they're compliant.
It would be 500 and some feet over if
Yeah,
this were.
give or take.
Any further questions for Mr. Smith? Would the petitioner like to come up and to the podium, please, and give your name and address?
Hello, my name is Lacey Decker. I am one of the homeowners at 25 Colony Court in Zionsville, Indiana.
Dan Decker, I'm the other homeowner.
My name is Vince. I'm with Vince Braun. I'm with Coach House Garages, who will be doing the work. And I live at 1617 South End Street in Elwood, Indiana.
Could you tell us about your project, please? And
Yeah, absolutely. So like many people in the times of COVID, right, we found a few hobbies that we have. My husband recently in that time took up woodworking. Based on the current layout of our home and the vehicles that we don't have room for him to be able to continue that hobby in the current garage that we occupy. So therefore, we were looking for an additional space. We were very purposeful in the size that we chose, being a standard car garage, because that provides ultimate flexibility for us in the future. while we love where we live currently, we may not always be the homeowner that resides there. So we wanted to provide ultimate flexibility for them, as well as the fact that 1/3 of the homes on our street currently have attached and detached garage spaces. So this will actually allow us to be more comparable to those homes that are currently sitting on our street.
Okay. Any questions for the petitioner?
Did you say you do not use your current garage for parking your vehicles?
No, we do use our current garage, which does not allow him to continue his hobby of woodworking.
So I noticed in your finding of fact that you mentioned for question number 3, about unnecessary hardships, you mentioned that not allowing this building to be constructed keeps you from, does not allow you to demolish the smaller buildings unless you can replace it with a newer, higher quality building. That implies that you're thinking about demolishing, is it a shed or some other building on your property, or no?
At this point, we weren't planning to demolish that. However, if it is a requirement, we would consider it.
If I may, I have to apologize. I was using a previous.
I'm sorry, could you step to the
Yes.
mic because thank you.
I'm sorry. I was using a previous variance that we worked on with you guys, and I was typing in some of the things, and the demolished part does not apply. And I apologize. I typed that in by accident. I thought I'd reread through and thought I'd taken that out, but I didn't. So that's my fault. There's no building to be demolished.
There is no plan to demolish
No,
your
there's no need to
existing
demolish
shed
anything on that property.
Okay.
Well, if I may, I think part of what you were getting at there is that the answer to that question from the petitioner's point of view really did not demonstrate a hardship. It says it doesn't allow for the owner to expand the use and value of his property nor allow to demolish. We'll eliminate that. Unless he can replace them with a newer, high-quality building that better fits his needs. And I think from our perspective, that does not represent an unnecessary hardship. I was anxious to hear what the need was for additional garage space, and that sometimes does allow us to see that there is an unnecessary hardship, but I'm not sure that this answer really demonstrates that.
And just to be clear, this is what is required by the zoning ordinance. That's one of the 3 criteria that we must use in order to make decisions. And so it's not something that is of our, that we've manufactured out of whole cloth here ourselves.
No.
So we're just following what is prescribed in the ordinance.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could add one more comment,
Sure.
today it is a hobby. Someday, hopefully, with additional practice and more time, it could be an additional income stream for our family. We're not there yet to say that commit to saying that's what's going to happen, because we have some skills to work on and to hone in, but it could potentially be an additional income for our family, which currently would help with potential hardship as well.
Right.
My apologies if that wasn't clear.
Yeah, I think the challenge is just the definition of hardship as we have to apply it. There's nothing unique about the site that's causing this. It can't be anything, you can't use an example of you're not going to get the value out of your property that somebody else would. That's not able to be factored into the definition of hardship. And I think that's the thing that's going to be the challenge here is, what may be a hardship for you is not a hardship of a practical nature as it relates to the definition that we have to abide by.
Is there anyone here who would like to speak on behalf or in opposition to this petition? Or do we have anyone online? No? Further discussion here among ourselves?
I'm with what's been said, that I'm struggling with some hardship here.
Let's see.
The formula is frustrating because it is a large lot and your home could be larger and then the math would change, right? It is,
Right.
it is obvious that other homes there are considerably
Yeah, I know-
bigger and have done this, but that it is the math and the formula of the ordinance that's the hang-up.
Yeah, I know this is not what you're asking, but I'm going to ask staff, if you turned your current garage into living space, that changes the whole equation then. Am I correct there?
Yeah, so what we do is, the technical term for it is finished living area, right? Which in layman's terms is conditioned space, so heated and aired space. So if they were to, which again, this was not proposed, so I don't want to talk y'all into something that y'all don't want to do, but if you were to convert your current garage into a bedroom or something of that nature, you see it oftentimes with other houses, that would add to your finished conditioned space, which would increase the square footage of your primary structure, which by default would then increase the number that you would be allowed to build.
They'd still be short though. 'Cause
I was about
you're
to
adding
say,
600, but that only gets you 300. They're
Right.
520 over.
Right.
And then they'd be losing garage space, so they need a 3-car garage to be
Yeah.
added as opposed to a 2. So there really is no practical math short of a larger addition to the house that makes that
Yeah.
even work.
If you decide to add on to your home, different conversation, right? But short of adding an addition to your primary structure, you're going to be hard to get the math to work.
I mean, you can't even get rid of the shed and
Right.
get there.
You can't get the math to work.
Any further comments? Are we ready to make a motion? Further discussion? Anything else you would like to share with us?
Well, I mean, maybe in the future, if we consider maybe switching that to a conditioned space. I mean, that's something we might consider, as we do have 2 little girls, and I'm sure they're going to want a space because it is a pretty small house. So, I mean, that could be a benefit. And adding the 600 and deducting the 600 off of the accessory footage, I don't know if that math would actually, because that would be like removing the 600 from the accessory part and adding 600 to the, I'd have to sit down.
It doesn't
and do the math.
balance.
And it becomes a calculation then about, okay, we've done away with our garage, so now we need to find another place to park our vehicles. And
Yeah.
then your woodworking,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Move somewhere else, yeah.
Yeah, so it can be quite convoluted. Anyone, we ready to have a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move that docket number 2024-07-DSV Development Standard Variance to permit the accessory, where am I on the right one here? Permit the accessory use square footage
Yes.
to exceed 50% of the primary use at 25 Colony Court be denied as presented and described based on findings of fact in the staff report and staff recommendations and submitted findings of fact. Substantial and compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fedor. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Sorry, we are constrained by the ordinances with regard to the necessity of having a particular hardship in your case that would mandate that we could change the development standards or vary the development standards. So, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on our docket is docket number 2024-08-DSV, the Ronald R. Clark Revocable Trust, to permit 2 lots exceeding the 3-to-1 depth-to-width ratio in the rural single-family residential zoning district. Mr. Smith, are you ready to give us a staff report, please?
Yes, ma'am. As you can see on the slide, this is a large, one large 20-acre parcel. And really, I don't want to oversimplify it, but essentially they're just wanting to split this into two separate, I believe it's 9 and some change acre tracts of land. Essentially the line kind of going right down the middle, splitting those into 2 lots. Section 194-082 essentially requires the lot depth to width ratio to be no greater than 3-to-1. In this case, I put the numbers down. This case, lot 1 would be 3.7-to-1, and lot 2 would be 3.79-to-1. Obviously, that exceeds the 3-to-1 lot ratio, so they're here requesting a variance to deviate from that standard. As far as staff positioning, number 1, the grant will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, general welfare of the community. Number 2, the value of the area will not be adversely impacted. Number 3 is, again, where we struggled to get to hardship. Staff believes strict application of the zoning ordinance will not result in unnecessary hardship. We believe it is tied to the petitioner's desire to split this parcel into 2 lots. Denying the request would not result in their ability or their inability to use the property in its current zoning designation. They could still use it for residential purposes. However, they would just have 1 lot rather than 2. This is a self-created issue. We believe hardships, again, should not be self-created. And because of that, that is why we could not find hardship and we did not support the request. I'll turn it back over to you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions for staff about this petition?
Can you repeat the proportion that they actually ended up? It was
So lot
it's in here.
1 is 3.7, well, technically it's 3.776 to 1. And lot 2 is 3.793 to 1.
okay.
So essentially, they're dividing a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you was to draw, like, as you see the picture on the left, that is what they're proposing on the screen here, essentially drawing a line straight down the middle, dividing it into 2 almost equal halves.
So I have a question regarding that particular ordinance and what is magical about the 3-to-1 ratio. Is there something that has to do with safety?
So, well, I mean, I'll tell you what I've learned. I can't prove this, but I've had conversations with numerous people. I believe this originated from the county, a county ordinance back in the day, and it was essentially designed to prevent what we call flag lots, which essentially gets its name because the lots look like a big flag, right? However, our ordinance doesn't specify its intent. It just says what it says, right? And so even though I can speculate, right, that it was designed to prevent flag lots, I don't have anything in our current zoning ordinance that says its true intent. It just says 3-to-1. So in this case, we have to apply that, even though we might suspect that it was probably designed or intended for other purposes. Our zoning ordinance doesn't specify.
I can respond a little bit further to that, having worked for Hancock County. And that's a standard that's pretty typical to be a depth to width ratio. And it often does come about of history of property owners creating long, deep lots. And then it's customary, unfortunately, for that back 20, if you will, to get neglected. So the property owner, they may maintain the front portion where there's a house, and then the back portion over time tends to get neglected because it's really not usable, or it's too much land. It's really don't need the extra land. So often jurisdictions come up with this ratio just to prevent the formation of long, narrow, deep lots where the back acreage tends to get neglected and grow up in weeds or noxious weeds and so forth.
So if the petitioner decided they wanted to divide this land, not longitudinally, but through what I would call the meridian, to create two 10-acre lots, obviously there's a pipeline that I see there that would create, I think that's what I'm seeing there is a pipeline that would create an issue for the front lot. And they could access through a right-of-way the second lot in the back. I mean, is that something that's feasible or not?
Then do you get into a scenario that the lot doesn't have road frontage?
Right.
Right.
It may require a variance, trigger the need for a variance.
Yeah, so you're
Right.
going to need a variance one way or the other.
Yeah.
And there's also a creek that runs through the property as well.
So this particular property owner is really, must sell this as a 20-acre or subdivide it into some other,
A minor plat subdivision
plat.
of
Yeah.
4 to, probably 4 lots would be
Right.
reasonable.
Alternatively, if they did meet the 3-to-1, then there's going to be a remainder, right, to the far back. And then, how can that be used and how can that be utilized?
And I think actually in this lot, what you'd find is the houses would be built all the way at the back.
Right.
The northern half roughly is all very heavily forested. And that back of the property is all, I assume it used to be farmland or pasture land or something.
Right. Further questions for staff?
This is also that 20-acre magic number where someone could come in there and build a pretty significant sized barn if they desired with a house, and we'd be very limited on what we could and could not say could be done on that. That's clearly becoming a residential area. I don't think we want to see someone put a large barn or something in there beside the school necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, as an adjacent neighbor, limiting its use as a farm probably is a good thing. So getting it under that 20 acres.
Yeah.
Okay, well, is the petitioner or representative here, Mr. Burris? If you would give your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. As most of you know, my name is Roger Burris, and my office is at 410 West Oak Street, just down the street from here. I have a couple people here with me tonight. Carolyn Miner, the trustee, is not here, but her brother, Andy Clark, is here, and his wife, Laura. And then Andy Wirt, who's sitting by me, is a professional planner from my office. So he's here to back me up and make sure I don't forget anything.
Okay.
So yeah, this at first glance seemed to be a fairly simple matter, but then you get into the details. And as noted by staff, there's doesn't seem to be a problem with the two of the provisions of the findings that you need to make. And by the way, I redid the findings. Did those get distributed?
Yeah, so these are the findings that I distributed at
Right.
the beginning of the meeting.
So the two-page findings where I beefed it up, and I take responsibility for not doing that up front. I could have done that up front. It was my fault for not doing it. So I'm trying to make up for that. And if I go too long, just tell me
Don't
that
worry.
you've heard enough. Okay. Thank you. So I think some background would be helpful here. And so I first pulled up just a plat map, that doesn't show features, because it's a lot easier to see here than in this area. And actually, I've also labeled here the property that the same family owns right across the street, which is a 10-acre parcel that does not comply with the 3-to-1 requirement. Neither do the two neighbors on the west side of the property across the street. Those are all the same size lots. I mean, when you take a 40-foot quarter section of land, you divide it in half to 20, and then you divide it again, you get a lot that's about 335 feet by 1,320 feet, which is what you see across the street and what we're proposing with our idea of dividing this 20-acre parcel into 2 lots. And also, if you notice some of you may be familiar with Amos Drive over to the east of the 10-acre parcel, and those lots are typically, you've seen how some of them have been further divided, but those lots started out as 200 by 800, I think, so those are 4-to-1 lots. Obviously not in compliance with this. Another thing you should know is that, so my clients are the 3rd generation of owners of this property. Claudia Clark was the owner with her husband, Ron, and they lived there for over 50 years. They purchased the property, both parcels, from Claudia's parents. And so this property has significant sentimental value to the family. Like I said, they're going to keep the 10-acre parcel on the north side where the house is. And but on the south side, in order to, so both parents are gone now, so the property's in a trust, kind of like an estate, where the trustee has the obligation to carry out the terms of the trust, which in this case means basically sell the 20 acres. And so I can also tell you that the family has been very diligent and explored lots of options with what to do in order to sell this property. They first started out thinking that they would do like that they would plat the property and look at doing like 4 or 5 lots. By zoning in the R1, they could try to have as many as 10 lots on this property, but they really didn't want to do that. Basically this has been like a forest preserve and a little bit of farmland, and that's what they used it for basically 70 years. So this is the first time that this property, that anybody in the family's ever thought about selling this property. So it's a big decision for them. So it is necessary in order for us to close the trust that we sell this property. And so we're considering all these options. And somebody's already noted that gas pipeline. I've got a survey where I highlighted that. But you've already noted that. So, that would impact a couple of lots if we were going to do a plat. Probably, it wouldn't make it impossible, but it would affect a couple of lots. We then started exploring getting sanitary sewer service. And this is where it's very interesting. Because, there are sewer lines on either side. There are sewer lines. So this is the Whitestown sewer service map. And so you see the yellow line. I've highlighted the Clark 20 acres with a circle in red. So you see that all the properties to the west, south, and east of this parcel are all served by Whitestown sanitary sewers. I don't know why this property was carved out. I don't think the family knows. I haven't found anybody who knows. It might have been one of those back when Zionsville and Whitestown were fighting over where that line was going to end up. But, if somebody knows, please tell me. So we thought, we get sewers easily, but you can't. I mean, Whitestown's not going to serve it. It's not within their territory. They told us that. So it'd be up to Zionsville, and Zionsville doesn't have any sewer lines anywhere near there. So that was a problem. So next, the family was thinking about 3 lots. But then they also said, well, let's just put it on the market and see what happens. So they listed it with Bo Leffel for a year, maybe over a year. And they got some developers who wanted to take a stab at it. They weren't really offering what we thought the property was worth. And plus, the family didn't want to sell it to a developer. They didn't want to see it turned into medium, high, or even medium density. I mean, they were thinking 4, 3 lots. Finally, and then I pointed out that, okay, so if you haven't, under the zoning ordinance, if you haven't subdivided since January 1st of 1999, our ordinance preserves the right for those people to do one subdivision of the property without plating it. And I submitted those documents to the planning staff, and they agreed with us. It met that requirement. I mean, the Clarks had worked out some boundary line issues with the school, and then also with Stonegate on the other side, but, you know, those were not things that counted as in any subdividing. You know, they basically kept this property intact for 70 years. So after a year, you know, no decent offers, and they're coming back to me saying, what do we do next? And I tell them that, and they say, well, that sounds pretty good. That, I mean, the 10-acre lots is kind of the standard in this area, so we think what we're proposing, or what the family's proposing, is extremely reasonable and conscientious of the neighbors, because, you know, there's lots of other things that could happen to this property that would not be as good as what we're proposing. And yes, I can certainly talk about the 3-to-1 and where that came from, because I was doing zoning work back when that was put into play by Boone County. I think Jerry March was the planning director back then, and yeah, I mean, people back then, they weren't applying for variances from anybody. They were just using surveys to divide their property, you know, to sell off parcels. And again, the flag lots are typically where you put one house by the road, then you put a driveway next to it going back to a lot behind it, and then maybe another one. So, you know, you can find various places where that's happened in town. We didn't want to do that. So what do? We figure, well, we think this is a good example for a variance, which brings us to the unnecessary hardship. Oh, and by the way, on the 3-to-1, just to confirm that, I ran into Ed Mitro, so I asked him, and he confirmed it. I didn't even say, was this created to stop flag lots? I said, Ed, why do we have this requirement? He said, to stop flag lots. And also, you know, that 3-to-1 applies to the rural areas under Zionsville zoning, not to the urban. I think in the urban areas, it's basically handled with road frontage. So if this were urban rather than rural, we wouldn't have a problem. And so I think, you know, when you have a case where the rationale behind the ordinance provision is not being served, I think that's another thing that points to it being an unnecessary hardship, because, you know, our statute, which is more restrictive than most, you have to remember unnecessary meaning, you know, we've considered the options, and this option is reasonable, it's good for the neighbors. And so even though, you know, if you're just looking at, well, what's the hardship on the family? Well, the family has to do something here. They can't really keep the property and satisfy all the heirs. They're really trying to do something good for the neighbors. It's consistent with the other lots in this area. And so again, I've talked to Jonathan about this, and we respect each other's opinions, I think. I mean, I've reviewed a lot of cases on granting variances. In fact, I even found one involving Larry Jones, which kind of surprised me, but not on the other hand. And so you know, I've pulled out some of the language from some of the cases. I thought, I mean, your lawyer could probably do this better than me, but this was an Indiana Supreme Court case that said, the Board of Zoning Appeals is authorized by statute to grant variances from the terms of the ordinance where, owing to special conditions, a literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance will result in unnecessary hardship, so long as such action is not contrary to the public interest and the spirit of the ordinance is preserved and substantial justice is done. So this is, you know, talking about the fact that you're a quasi-judicial body. So, you know, you're not expected to be perfect, but you're expected to weigh the evidence. And if we present enough evidence that, you know, not just a hardship, but an unnecessary hardship, because it just doesn't make sense for this ordinance to be precluding what is proposed here. Another thing that's kind of in response to what I heard from Jonathan in the staff report, or whoever wrote it, is that I found a case that said that you can't just rely on the point that the petitioner can continue to use the property in conformance with the zoning ordinance. It's not fair to just say, well, they can continue using it for what they have. I mean, that's not going to help them or the town. And that you can consider when you're trying to consider the hardship, you can consider whether it's a hardship on the neighbors, which I think in this case it could be if they don't get the variance and are forced to do something like sell off parts of the property to adjoining owners, or, I mean, they could sell off the back part and then, but they don't want to do that. They want to create 2 nice 10-acre lots that will be an improvement to the neighborhood. It will be consistent with the neighborhood. And we think that that if you balance everything that you've heard, that you've brought up, and that we brought up, I think we have met the burden of proving an unnecessary hardship in this case. So we hope you agree. If you have any questions for me or my client, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Burris. Are there questions for Mr. Burris or his clients?
I don't have a question. We just got this evening, or at least some of us did anyhow, and so I've tried to read through it. But as I looked at this, I thought all along that this is not going to be something that's out of the ordinary for the area. And it backs up to, much denser housing. We do have lots of lots that exceed the 3-to-1 ratio, in particular out in rural areas. So I think this was helpful. It would have been nice to have had it ahead of time to read that, but I don't disagree with much of anything you said.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about hardship being the sticky issue, and I think one of the things that Mr. Burris said was based on a previous case law with the Indiana Supreme Court, was that the spirit of the ordinance needs to be preserved. And I think because we don't have flag lots in this instance, you're actually setting up a scenario that keeps you from having flag lots by allowing this. You preserve the integrity of what the ordinance was meant to do. And there are some hardships with the lot in how you would use it for any instance. And you're going to have to, I think, probably get a variance regardless of how you use it because of access to the site, because of utilities. I mean, I live 2 streets over on Westminster, and we have 3 houses that are on Indianapolis water, and then the rest are on Whitestown. Like, it's pretty indiscriminate with utilities throughout that area. So I can see by denying this, we will create other hardships for other reasons, utilities and otherwise. So
Yeah, I guess they would, with the 10-acre lots, they can do a septic. They don't have to worry about who's going to hook up to sanitary sewers. And
Yeah, and I would hate to see the family put in a position where their only option is to sell to a developer who will put numerous houses on a piece of land when they are really wanting to do something that is much more in their interest of their family.
I mean, it's a beautiful piece of property.
Knowing that you did try and sell it unsuccessfully does make a difference. It means there is a hardship and that you tried to sell it for this purpose and it didn't.
Yeah.
So.
And realistically, you get to these larger lots, the finances alone get challenging for anybody. Well, most people, I guess. Roger, is this something that in 6 months, if the lots don't sell, we're going to look at it again and say, well, we want to divide this into 4 or 5 acre lots?
We are really hopeful, and the family's been told by at least one realtor that that they think the 10-acre lots will sell. There seems to be a pretty good market. There's always been a good market for 5 and 10-acre lots around Zionsville. Not that many of them. So at least not anymore. So yeah, we would expect this to work out pretty well, and I'm not going to suggest what would happen if they don't sell. There's always options, you just never know what's going to happen. I've certainly done variances and plats where we then never ended up using them because the right buyer comes along, or maybe the right buyer comes along and then the buyer backs out, and then you're back to square one. So I've given up trying to predict things.
We ready for a motion?
Sure. I move the docket number 2024-08-DSV Development Standards Variance to exceed the 3-to-1 depth to width ratio for the property at 7281 East 550 South be approved as presented and described based in the staff report, the revised submitted findings of fact, and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fedor. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Burrs.
Mr. Burrs, I have another question that's unrelated to this petition, but the Ronald R. Clark, is he the Ronald Clark that was at Lilly? Was he an employee at Eli Lilly? He's retired now, but no. Okay. I worked with the Ronald Clark, who also lived in this vicinity, and he's.
So did Bob. I wondered about that too. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Smith, are we ready to push on?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, our next item on our agenda is docket number 2024-10-AP. And this is an administrative appeal, which is not something that we see frequently. So I have asked council to give us a little short summary of what the procedure will be before we start.
This is one of the 4 things that the BZA decides that you do very frequently: to development standards, use variances, and special exceptions. This is the 4th category, an administrative appeal. It's an appeal of an administrative decision of staff on interpretation of the zoning ordinance and how it applies to a particular request over which the plan department has jurisdiction. It's similar, it's required to have a public hearing. It's similar to the procedure for a development standard or use variance or special exception, where the petitioner will make a presentation. In this situation, staff will have the opportunity to defend its interpretation, and then the petitioner will have a brief rebuttal. And then the board you get to decide whether the two things: did the administrative decision violate, or is it not consistent with the zoning ordinance, or does it violate is it illegal in some other way? So your options are to affirm the administrative decision, to deny the petitioner's interpretation, or to say that it was the administrative decision was incorrect, or to modify it in some way. So those are your 3 options at the end. And it's common in interpretations, if there's a word in a sign ordinance or if there's there's a reported case on the meaning of move versus relocate. The staff, all planning staff has a primary interpretive authority, And then the appellate process, the Board of Zoning Appeals decides whether that's consistent with the ordinance or not, or illegal in some other way.
Okay, questions about?
I want to make sure I understand this. I think that the wording was a substantial deviation from the approved plan. So are we deciding whether or not this was or was not a substantial deviation?
Right, this is coming before you as a prior case was decided by the board, and its decision and the variance it granted and the commitments. And its staff interpretation, staff's decision, administrative decision here was whether the petition request or application was satisfied the board's prior decision and the commitments that were included in that decision.
You may remember that we saw this petition in September. And what was granted was an approval for an increased lot coverage from 20% to 20, I think it was 29%. And that was the only decision that we made for a pool and a deck. And then in the construction of the pool and the deck, some changes were made. So I think with that, if there are no further questions from council, then are the Stricklands here? Would you come to the podium, please, and give your name and address? And did I understand that your husband will be? Yeah?
He's watching online.
Okay, he's watching. Does he want to participate? Because
He is out of town.
Okay.
He's in Arizona for
All
work,
right.
so I got
So you're holding down the
volunteered to
fort.
be here.
Okay.
Would the plan be put up, because I thought it was up there? Or is that not?
Can you switch it from, I believe when he plugged in his laptop, it went from the west screen
While
to
they're
the
doing
east
that,
screen? So can you bring
If
it back
we
to my
deny
computer?
this, because the petition was approved once, if we
You're awesome.
deny the
Thank you.
administrative appeal, or they're able to go back, but they're able to go back through the BZA process again without waiting like a year, like if we were to deny a petition.
Right, because the conclusion is that this is substantially different than what was previously approved by the BZA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If you
I'm
give your
Emily
name and address,
Strickland.
please.
My husband, Robert Strickland, has been working with Jonathan for quite a while on this, and we appreciate all your help. We are at 4616 St. John Circle in Button Down Farms. So thank you guys for taking the time to hear the appeal of the building commissioner's decision. We know this is kind of a unique situation we're in. As you are aware, last fall we came before you to ask for approval to install a pool on our property. We were approved for the encroachment piece and the lot ratio increase to accommodate the pool and its location. We are using pools of fund for the installation of the pool and start to finish for the retention walls and concrete work. Pools of Fund did all of the original renderings that were submitted to get approval. When start to finish came out to start the construction on the retention walls, we realized that Pools of Fund forgot to include the pad for the pool equipment. Start to finish suggested we shift the pool closer to the house so we could stay in our approved lot ratio, since we still needed to add the additional concrete for the pool pad. When Start to Finish started the retention wall, they ran into some elevation issues with the proposed pool grade and the grade of the foundation for our home. They also shifted the retention wall 1.5 degrees from the originally proposed plans, because we wanted to make sure that we would not encroach on the 12-foot setback on the side yard to our neighbors, as well as have enough room to grade the dirt properly for drainage between us and our neighbors. The minor changes that were made actually brought the pool closer to the house and put less of the pool into the encroachment. When Pools of Fund went to pull the permit to dig the pool, we were told the minor changes were enough, that the building commissioner did not feel comfortable approving the permit and trumping the original plan. We are here to ask the BZA to approve the minor changes made to the original design. We have already applied for a new encroachment variance and have been approved on that. As you can see from the new renderings, the pool angle was changed by 1.5 degrees, allowing for better drainage between us and the neighbors. It then brought the pool closer to the home and brought more of the pool out of the encroachment. And it keeps us under the 29% lot ratio that was approved for us last fall. And that's including adding the pool equipment that was accidentally left off by the pool company. And this is Kevin and Caleb would start to finish, who are here to answer any technical questions that are above my head.
Okay, thank you. And I might mention the encroachment was on the utility and drainage easement, so that's what they're referring to. Okay. You have any comments that you would want to add?
Do I need to get my name and everything?
You do, yes.
Okay. My name's Kevin Thompson. I'm one of the owners at Start to Finish Landscaping. I live at 1661 West 136th Street in Carmel, Indiana. Yeah, so we were brought in, an original plan was done by another landscaper. They opted to not go with that landscaper. So we kind of came in on like plans 2, 3. And then Caleb is here. He's one of my designers. So I just brought him along because he actually did the 3D renderings and the AutoCAD plans for this. And when we got on site to start doing the retaining wall, based upon this was all approved, we were good to start the work for the retaining wall. We're really close to the setback line of 12 feet on the property line. All the watershed, kind of where that arrow shows access, comes down that property line. We wanted to be able to swale in between the neighbor's property and their pool because it channels right to the woods. And so we shifted the wall by like 2 feet. And honestly, we didn't realize the shift we were making was going to change the encroachment of the easement on the backside. It brought the front side up a little bit. And this all came to fruition when Pools of Fun, I was out there with them. We used 100-foot tapes and got like the exact dimensions of the wall off the house and everything. And once we overlaid it on the plan, we realized we were rotated by 1.5 degrees. And the building commissioner decided it was a deviation from the original plan, and that's why we're here today. So.
Okay. Questions for petitioner or comments? Discussion?
Unfortunately, this is the danger of designing something without a real survey to start with, is that when you get out there and construct, things change. I do think it is different than what we approved. Not that it's bad, but that it is different. The difference was because of lack of detail in the design up front. So
I think it's different. I don't think it's substantially different. And I think that, the thing that I appreciate is, making some of those adjustments on the fly to stay within the original commitments of the lot coverage ratio and to not go into the setback any more than they already were. And to find a condition that ultimately was going to put more water onto somebody else's property and solving that problem ahead of time. Yes, it's not what we approved. I'm not a fan of obviously going against something that we have approved, but I get it and I understand it. As an architect, I remember we had designed a hospital and it was 3.5 degrees rotated, and the designer made us change it to 3 degrees because it mattered. And it was 0.5 degree and nobody was ever going to see it. And so that kind of sticks with me that, you kind of have to look at the relative nature of, is anybody really going to notice when they're out there, and how much is really 1.5 degrees in the scheme of things. I do think it's appropriate to come back to this body to make sure that we're comfortable with it. And certainly staff's decision wasn't wrong. But I do feel like, having voted on this the first time, that they've kept to what we asked them to do, not exactly the way that it was proposed to have been done, but still keeping those same commitments in mind. So
I think that it comes down to also what does the word substantially mean? How do you define substantially different versus, is this substantially different than what was, and of course we didn't opine on the pool and deck when they were here. We were only opining about lot coverage.
Yeah.
So, and deciding about lot coverage. Other comments, Mr. Munday?
Yeah, in going through this initially, I wasn't exactly sure what we were to make a decision on, but I pretty much, I agree with what Mr. Lake said, and that is that I think this was substantial enough that the inspector did the right thing and brought it back, and that the then Mr. Dale did the right thing by saying, let's go back to the original source for this decision to allow the variance to begin with. So I say, I almost have to say it was substantial, required that for him to be able to make that decision. At the same time, I would say that the changes did not go outside of what I think we intended to approve in the first place. So, and in saying that, I guess we must decide that this is not a substantial difference from what was approved.
Yeah.
You have a motion to that effect?
And the word the word that escaped me earlier was reverse. So you approve the administrative decision or reverse it.
I mean, so we give this a name negative for however the terminology is tonight, they would have to come back, and this would just create more headache, I think, than we necessarily need to. 1%, I agree with everyone. I think the staff brought it back as 1% can be quite a bit, especially the further out you get from something. So, but I'm with everybody. I don't see this being that big of enough thing to have to make them go through the entire process again.
Okay, we need a motion.
So I would make a motion to, and correct me if I say this wrong, to reverse staff's decision and approve the changes, given that I do not believe that they rise to the level of substantial relative to the intent of this body, relative to the original petition approval.
Will that suffice? Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Monday. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. All right, good luck. No further,
Thank you.
please don't make any more changes.
No more change.
No more
Invited to the pool.
All right. Oh, ooh, well, and please, to our staff, our wonderful staff, we appreciate very much the diligence with which you do your jobs. So,
And the building inspector.
and the building inspector for
Don't know
sure.
that I would have expected anything to be done
No.
differently,
Yeah.
but I think, yeah. So.
Well, so our last item on the agenda, and I don't want to belabor this too much, but I do think, particularly after our last meeting, I thought it might be a moment to revisit our rules. And particularly since we have a couple of new members on the board that we have not had this discussion. But there are a couple of suggestions that I would like to make about how we run our meetings. One of them was that I think, as I mentioned earlier this evening, we return to the 15-minute petitioner and remonstrator sort of time slot, which is, going till midnight last month. I blame myself for that, for not having been a little more diligent with regard to timeline. There are several things that are listed on the agenda that are open to discussion. One thing that occurred to me in reading through the minutes, which I know all of you did diligently, there are a number of, there were several, I think there were maybe 3 or 4 PowerPoint presentations during that meeting. And each PowerPoint presentation of 8 to 10 slides, then each slide was presented, and then there was a sizable narrative around each slide. I would like to suggest for discussion that we ask attorneys, because it's typically the attorneys that are doing this, who are representing petitioners, to submit their slides in advance, and we receive them with our packets, and we have a chance to look at them in advance of the meeting, and then they have the option of just, hitting the high points of the slides at our meeting, rather than having you look at 10 slides and having somebody read it to you with all that information that you've not had a chance to see until the evening of the meeting. I'm open to discussion.
No, I like that. I think the attorneys feel like they get paid by the word. Sorry, over there.
Cover your ears.
Present company.
But, yeah, but I mean, I will say, if Matt Price is listening, sorry, Matt, Matt tends to speak for a rather long period of
Yes, he
time,
does.
but he adds, I feel like, a lot of good color. We've had other individuals where we've asked them, if staff's already covered it, if you could not cover it, that'd be great. And then they go and literally cover the exact same thing that Jonathan covered and that we didn't need to hear twice. I think so administratively on our behalf, I think not only reviewing those presentations ahead of time, but when we hear an exact duplication without extra color being added to say, okay, you're saying the exact same thing we just heard. Is there anything additional
Right.
that you want to add? Because we had one guy that went on for 30 minutes and didn't say anything different than what we heard over there.
And some of the color is not what we need for our decision-making. That's part of my issue is we have certain parameters that we need to use to make decisions. And sometimes those basic parameters get covered with all the color.
That's true. That is true.
And just looking my own way of processing things, and everybody's different. If I had the slides in advance of the meeting, I could go through the slides, make notations of things that I want to clarify when the petitioner is here, and I will have much better grasp of the information than trying to see it the night of, and particularly when it got to be 10:30 and 11 o'clock that evening, it was tough.
Yeah.
So if we are amenable to that, then we can, we can amend our rules to include that those presentations, if there is in fact a PowerPoint type presentation, that those be submitted in advance. And I think on behalf of the staff, we receive our packets on the Friday before the meeting. We would expect that any of that information that's going to be included with the petition be submitted by that time so it can go out with the rest of the packet on Friday. Now, maybe that's unreasonable.
What do you need?
I don't necessarily need a day, but you'll, to reference Roger, for example, from tonight, typically what happens is we'll post an issue and send out all of our staff reports on a Friday, right? Typically I try to do it Friday morning. Sometimes it's Friday afternoon, but what'll happen is people will receive this information, and if there is a negative finding or an unfavorable staff position, at that point they've received this staff report on Friday, and now they're going to start, I don't want to say scrambling around, but they start trying to put together, using our staff report, they start trying to find exhibits and draft new findings to counter the staff report. And what happens is exactly what happened with Roger this afternoon, is we get, after everything's been distributed, we then receive new exhibits, new findings, and the expectation is that staff is responsible for, sending that out. We're essentially acting as the paper pusher for all this new information. And, I believe, it leads to, when I first started this, I was not accustomed to that. Every other place I'd worked for had a hard stop date, and anything past that was the petitioner's responsibility. We didn't say that you can't present it, but we said, staff is not accepting any additional info. You can present it at the meeting if you so choose. However, that wasn't the case when I started here. And so what that led to, if you remember, like the September, October meetings, was information that was in the staff report didn't match the exhibits that were in y'all's packets. And then there was a case where y'all didn't have the most recent exhibit, right? And what that was, we'd sent out the staff reports, and then exhibits over the next 3 or 4 days were just coming in and out, and they were changing stuff. That's problem number one. Number two, the word deceiving might be a little extreme, but what we require from petitioners is a 10-day public noticing requirement, right? And so what will often happen is they will send out a site plan or some sort of plan in their 10-day public noticing documents, and then they'll wait till the day or two before the meeting and switch those exhibits out, right? So for example, you can show the neighbors a beautiful landscape plan that just blows their mind. And then we allow the day of the meeting for them to come in, change that landscape plan to the bare minimum that meets requirements. And, is it the neighbor's responsibility to check the information? Should they show up to the date of the meeting? Possibly. But I would argue that they probably didn't show up to the meeting because the information they received in their certified letter was beautiful and they didn't have any opposition to it, right?
So that leads to another thing that, in my discussion with Mike and Jonathan, had to do with the prohibiting the introduction of new information at the meeting. And how do we think about that if, in fact, it doesn't give the staff a chance to vet what is being presented by a petitioner? Is that too much of a hard stop? I mean, should we say, fine, if you want to show up here with stuff that hasn't been submitted up until now, how willing are we to take?
I'd hate to take too hard of a line on that,
Right.
because sometimes they just don't know. They don't know that the barn is historic or this or that's important. And so new information comes up that's important to us that I don't want to tell them they can't tell us and we
Yeah.
can't take into account. But certainly they could get the PowerPoints and real exhibits to you ahead of time, and that those should match the public
Yeah,
documents.
and I mean, at the same time, I'll put my petitioner hat on.
Yeah.
So, when we find out that we may have a negative finding, we may not have realized why they think it doesn't comply. And so, I mean, you do scramble to say, oh, well, we clearly thought it did, and here's why we did. We didn't include the information because we never would have thought they would have come to that conclusion, but the staff did. And I think if you're gonna do that and say, look, after that 10-day notice period, you can't provide any more information.
No, that's not.
I know. I'm just saying if that were the case, though, I think then you'd have to say that staff has to have their reports published 10 days prior to the meeting.
Well, when
Just because.
the staff reports are posted on that Friday when the information comes to us, correct?
Typically, I try, I think there's been one case since I've been here where I haven't met the deadline. I try to post them Thursday.
Right, but I mean, when we get them, they're already posted.
Oh, yeah, they're typically posted on a Thursday. Y'all receive your information Friday.
And I'm not trying, my goal is to give the best possible service to both the petitioner, the people that are sitting out there, those folks that sat out there for 5 hours at that meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not the best service, and I think it doesn't make us look like we're.
I think it depends on the type of information that is being presented at the meeting.
Yeah.
Because if the information is actually a change in project description, then there's no chance for staff to review it or the public to have a chance to review it.
Well, and I think that's an instance where we, whether it's initiated by staff or by us, should go for a continuance. Not only so staff has a chance to review it, but then that puts it back out, and that somehow that information then needs to be included in next month's packet so that the neighbors can then see, oh, wait a minute, there was a change, it got continued.
Right.
Because I don't want to disenfranchise a remonstrator, but I also don't want to disenfranchise a petitioner who maybe doesn't have the chance to react to something that they weren't aware of last minute in an effort to get their
Well, I think it's a
petition
question of
passed.
degree, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, I feel like what Roger did with this was not over the line, but I can see where somebody might, like, the day of, come up with something that is going to be a major
Yeah.
change. And I think you're right that should generate a continuance. And
Yeah, so I think there's a little diligence on our part, maybe that just to keep top of mind for us that, oh, hey, this isn't quite what we were shown. Neighbors may not think it's quite what was shown. Let's go for a continuance.
I think it does depend on what information
Yeah.
we're getting, because we often get remonstrators' letters as we arrive.
Yeah.
Yet, generally speaking, I'd say, I wouldn't want to continue it, just unless there's something that's really new
Yeah.
there.
Yep.
But at the same time, if it's the petitioner or the petitioner's representative that has not provided us things until the last minute, then I'm all for saying we're just going to have to continue it.
Sounds like a definition of substantial.
Right.
Sorry?
Do you guys have the power to issue a continuance?
Yes.
Or does it have to be requested?
Now we can issue a continuance.
So did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, I mean, I think a lot of the late submissions isn't really the cause of the, a 2-hour hearing. If you follow the rules and stick to these and make it very clear, and then you can judge that, you have the 10 o'clock cutoff in the rules, and it's just, if we're going to have 40 minutes allotted for each case, then we have to we really can't schedule 11 petitions.
You have to do the
Well,
math.
so I think the
Yeah.
other part of that too is not just the time requirements, but there's that section in there that says that if, remonstrator A says the exact same
Right.
thing as remonstrator B,
Redundancy. Right.
we just say, okay, you're making the same point.
Do you have anything else?
Steve, you did a good job of this in the past of saying, okay, the point I'm hearing you make is this. Somebody's already made it. Do you have a new point?
But I think
No? Okay.
allowing them to give their name and address and say, I agree with X. End of discussion.
Correct.
So because they do, they need to register that they were here, and
Yeah.
I agree completely.
And a +1, so
Yeah.
we know the emphasis that,
Right.
hey, that's a really hot topic. We've had 7 people that think that.
Right.
But the first person normally gives this nice big spiel as to why, and
Yeah.
everybody else can literally just say +1.
Well, and if I have the permission to be abrupt, which I can be,
Yeah.
then, believe me, then I think also hearing about going back to that 200-watt radio station in Iowa is going to be off the table too. You don't even know what I'm talking about, do you? But that's okay. Steve does, don't you?
No, but I remember the radio tower and the
No, I'm talking about Ronald
interesting
Reagan.
remonstrator
Reagan said
on
that.
the
So
radio tower.
there is one other thing, and that is the policy about withdrawal of petitions, because we discussed this. Does it make sense to suspend rules to withdraw petitions, or should we just allow people who have made the decision that they no longer want to pursue the petition, even though we've heard it once, to just withdraw it? I mean, right now, if we've heard it and then it's been continued, or they make a decision to withdraw it, we have to suspend rules to be able to do that. Does that still make sense? Does what I'm saying make sense?
If someone wants to
Yeah,
withdraw, let them withdraw. We shouldn't have a rule
Yeah.
against that.
Yeah, I don't know why we would not allow them to make a withdrawal once they've, provided that information. Unless there's something I don't understand about it, I don't know why we wouldn't allow them to go ahead and make a withdrawal.
So that would be something else we could change. With regard to these things that we're talking about, who's going to be handling the,
We would be a staff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and submit to you a red line version.
okay, but you need a vote from us authorizing that these
Well, we want to make
changes-
sure you're on the same page, that
Right.
we're in agreement on these things before we begin
Yeah. Are we,
the work.
any discussion about, we've talked about the presentation or submission of any PowerPoint presentation or say a video presentation of any type in advance of the meeting. We've talked about having the ability to withdraw petitions without having to suspend rules, just by the petitioner asking to withdraw.
Yep.
We've talked also about an informal understanding among ourselves that if new information arrives at the meeting that we feel is pivotal, that we have a continuance, so we ask for, we mandate a continuance.
Can we make it clear to petitioners that if they do introduce new information, that they're risking us
Yes.
continuing?
Yeah.
Because they need to understand that if they do that, that's what they're
Yeah.
possibly gonna
At
get.
their own detriment.
Right, so this is your own decision, so, okay.
Yeah, and then I personally am on board with the withdrawals and requiring any materials that are going to be presented to be submitted ahead of time, whatever ahead of time means. We can
Well, I
figure that
We'll
out.
propose something in the
Yeah,
rules.
I think that's fine.
That makes, works. for
I think still allowing people to introduce new information, I think we do that. We just, again, we have to take it upon ourselves to decide if that's pivotal information, and therefore we should do a continuance to make sure that everybody has a chance to.
On a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, on a case-by-case
And
basis.
there's a difference between factual information or that they're just going to argue it a different way. I mean, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think you can prevent them from picking up on a staff report no matter when
Yeah,
and changing
exactly.
their approach to the argument. But if they're changing changing the facts substantially, that's a different issue.
I think Jonathan gave a good example of somebody committing to doing an enhanced landscaping package, and then arriving here the night of the hearing and saying that, in fact, we're just doing the run-of-the-mill.
I just had a question. What are the town's requirements for the required notice because I don't think that it's in the statute that a petitioner has to give their whole case to all the adjacent landowners, or is that?
It says it in here. It's a site plan. Here we go.
Which section are you looking at?
I thought it was in here. I read it somewhere. There's a list. It's a site plan. I know they typically include a narrative. We have a public noticing document that they're required to send out. Essentially, it's a Word version of the newspaper ad that they publish in the newspaper. So there's like 2 or 3 items that they have. I don't have the list in front of me, but that list of whatever they send out, it's not, to my knowledge, it's never been an issue from the petitioner side of things.
Can you let us know what updated exhibits we see deviate from what the public sees?
Yeah, I mean, I can let y'all know. Yeah, for my notes, to circle back off of that just real quick, back to the time allowed for petitions. As he mentioned, each petition, the presenter's allowed 15, remonstrators are allowed 15, and then you're allowed 5 minutes apiece for rebuttals, for a total of 40 minutes for each petition. Do we want to consider changing those timeframes?
I think that's a max. The way I look at that is a max,
Okay.
a maximum of 15 minutes, and I expect, as tonight, none of the presenters took 15 minutes to make their presentations, and we had no remonstrators, so that didn't come into effect. I think where it will be a problem is, for example, with last month's meeting about the storage area, because obviously we had a presenter who had a lot to say and 10 slides to say it, and then a lot of people who were there to remonstrate. So, that's a question of being able to sort of keep people on track, and I think, asking them to not be redundant, giving them the opportunity to say something, even if it's just to register that they're here and they're in opposition.
Yeah.
So
what I have in my notes, I got some pretty good feedback on the withdrawal of petitions, addressing that in our rules of procedure, and then the PowerPoints to be submitted ahead of time. I've got good feedback on that.
Yeah.
The other bullet points, I'm not really hearing much support for.
Well, or
not support.
that it doesn't need necessarily
Doesn't need
change
change.
in the ordinance.
Changes isn't necessarily.
And if we find that even 15 minutes becomes cumbersome, then we'll revisit. If we find that it's becoming hard, and I would like to suggest that we begin this sort of policy, maybe not at the next meeting. I don't know how long it's going to take to train the lawyers. How long does it take to train a lawyer?
A long time.
It's like pulling somebody over in a school zone. You only got to do it once. They're all going to talk.
No, I mean, I think if we, is it unreasonable to say, instead of starting in May, we think about June 1st as the first meeting in which they have to submit things in advance, or no?
Well, so, I think we need an ordinance change first. So I think maybe at the next meeting, if we can get the rules changed and approve that, then the following meeting, we can maybe introduce those rules to the public. And then at the next meeting, which would actually be the July meeting, then that's when they could take effect. Now, I don't think it hurts though, even when, the petitioner gets up, please remember, you have 15 minutes.
Right.
Please remember, and just, we can start that next month.
No, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that may get some pushback is the idea of having to submit things in advance, but,
They'll get used to it.
they'll get used to it.
And I think the way you started this evening by saying, hey, I want to remind everybody, here are these time limits. I think that was great. And then I would do it every time a petitioner comes up. By the way, you have 15 minutes.
To tell us your case.
Cumulatively,
Yeah.
right? Not per person.
Yeah.
But there's 15 minutes allocated for those to speak in favor,
For that
and then another
petition.
15
Right.
for those who want to speak against.
Right.
Yeah, but then the petitioner only gets 15.
Right.
Short of, then they can rebut what the.
15, 15, 5, petitioner rebuttal, 5, remonstrator rebuttal.
Right.
And the
Well-
questions we asked them does not
No,
count
it
as the
doesn't
time.
count.
No,
So
but it actually
it's likely to go
says
more.
remonstrators for, remonstrators against, both get 15 minutes each.
It says here, petitioners and persons appearing in support of a petition shall be allotted a total of 15 minutes.
Okay,
Okay,
Okay.
so they're grouped together.
so that's the grouping.
So those
okay.
speaking one in favor, including the petitioner, are allocated 15 minutes. Remonstrators and persons appearing in opposition should then be allotted a total of 15 minutes.
Gotcha, okay. Okay.
And then 5 minutes for rebuttal.
And I guess
And-
theoretically, the petitioner is also in support, so you've got all your support people grouped together and all
Right.
your against people
Yeah.
grouped together. so.
But the constant going back between remonstrator,
Yeah, no,
petitioner,
that's-
remonstrator,
that shouldn't help.
petitioner.
No, that shouldn't happen.
Well, but I think
That's
That's
also-
really, that's really where that comes, well, I didn't know either.
No, that's my bad. I mean,
Unless
that's-
we're
that's-
asking, them questions of the
Right.
demonstrator or the
Right.
But
petitioner.
the
The lawyer will
these
jump back
people
up there
often have
anytime.
is, well, he got to speak again, how come I don't get to speak?
Right.
Well, it doesn't work that
Well,
way.
and I think,
And
Doing their
the other
job.
thing to really, when people are making their comments, they are really not entitled to, they can state questions rhetorically,
Right,
but they can't ask the board questions, they can't ask me questions, they can't ask the petition, they can rhetorically say, I want to know what the petitioner thinks about this, but they can't, because that just starts a dialogue where the petitioner runs up and says something,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
they say, well, what about this? And it turns into Jerry Springer. But I mean, that's just important. It's public comment. It's not public questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Unless it's rhetorical and it's,
and it's not public debate.
Dave
It's not
Franz
correct.
has done a good job at Plan Commission of saying, you kind of looking at the petitioner and saying, hey, kind of take down anything you want to counter with, but we're not going to have you answer right now. We're going to give everybody that's against it a chance to get up there. Then you can come back up. So,
Right,
And then that gavel is for all the murmuring when the people start, hissing and booing. Just shut them down. That's fun. Use that gavel.
I will. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
so moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay, this has been good. Thank you
I
very
like
much.
to see that.
that was very helpful.